Our last system to discuss is the reproductive system. And obviously here we divide the reproductive systems into the male reproductive system and the female reproductive system. Together, these systems allow sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction is the process by which organisms can produce offspring by making germ cells known as gametes. The male gamete being sperm and the female gamete being an egg or oocyte. When these gametes combine to form the new offspring, that offspring has genetic variation, which means the DNA has been changed through the process of meiosis and combination of chromosomes from the mother and the father. Compare that to asexual reproduction, where the offspring is genetically identical to the organism or the cell that produces the offspring. So let's begin by discussing the male reproductive system. The male gonad is known as the testis or testicle. This is the organ that produces the gamete or sperm cell. Sperm and oocytes are both haploid cells. Haploid refers to half the number of chromosomes as a diploid cell. All cells of your body other than the gametes are diploid, meaning they have 46 chromosomes. The male reproductive system consists of a number of ducts. These ducts either are the site in which the sperm are produced, or a site where they are stored and allowed to mature, or the duct transports the male gamete or sperm out of the reproductive tract. There's also hormone production involved. The testis produces testosterone and inhibin. And we'll be reminded of hormones that target the gonads. These hormones include follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. We'll also learn about the three male sex glands. The three male sex glands produce secretions that are added to sperm as they travel down the system of ducts. When we get to the female reproductive system, we'll discuss the ovary, which houses the developing oocytes or eggs. These oocytes are found in small containers called ovarian follicles. We'll discuss the site of fertilization that happens in the fallopian tube or uterine tubes. These are the tubes that are going to be transporting the oocyte from the ovary towards the uterus. It also transports the sperm towards the oocyte. So they meet up in the fallopian tube and fertilization occurs there. Then the embryo needs to travel into the uterus where it completes embryonic development and then fetal development. Finally, we'll discuss the hormones involved in the female reproductive system. They include estrogen, progesterone, relaxin, and inhibin. So you'll notice there's a number of organs to discuss, identify, learn their function, and there's a number of hormones that regulate these two systems. Let's begin by looking at the male reproductive structures or organs. This is a drawing primarily of the scrotum, which houses the testes outside the abdominal pelvic cavity, whereas when we get to female reproductive organs, we'll find the ovaries inside the pelvic cavity. The testes are found outside the abdominal pelvic cavity in order to maintain a temperature slightly below normal body temperature. Normal body temperature is 37 degrees Celsius. But for proper sperm development and production, the temperature has to be 1 or 2 degrees lower than that. So somewhere around 35 degrees Celsius is the proper temperature for sperm production. To regulate the temperature, the testes are regulated by muscle. There's a number of muscles that, when contracted, will move the testes closer to the body. And that's a way to maintain the temperature. If the environment is very cold, the testes can move closer to the body to maintain that temperature. If the environment is warm, the testes can be dropped further from that high temperature. These muscles include the cremaster muscle, which is actually an extension of the internal oblique. The internal oblique is one of the layers of the abdominal wall, and it continues down and attaches to a testis. And you can see that if it contracted, it could move that testis closer to the body. There's also a thin layer of muscle just below the skin of the scrotum called the dartos muscle. So this is a subcutaneous muscle which, when it contracts, it can also help move those testes closer to the body. And this helps the loss of heat from the scrotum. You'll notice that this is a transverse section of the penis. So the penis has been, unfortunately, removed. And this shows a few structures inside, like the urethra. This is the spongy urethra. It is surrounded by erectile tissue known as the corpus spongiosum. Then there are also two cylindrical masses of tissue called corpora cavernosa. These collectively are the erectile tissues of the penis. Finally, on this drawing, we see a number of things housed in what's called the spermatic cord. The spermatic cord is everything that needs to either get down to the testes or help deliver something out of the testes and into the pelvic cavity. Those structures are all found in a cord. And that cord travels through the abdominal wall via an inguinal canal. An inguinal canal is literally a little hole in the abdominal wall. So these things can move either down out of the pelvic cavity or back into the pelvic cavity. For example, if you look closely, the vas deferens is part of this system of ducts. And the vas deferens is going to transport the sperm, which were produced and stored down here, up into the pelvic cavity. You'll also notice blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, and nerves, all contained in that spermatic cord. The next picture shows a lot of these structures again, but adds in many of the structures and organs found in the pelvic cavity that are related to male reproduction. So we'll kind of first go by way of sperm. Sperm are produced in the testes. There are some small little ducts, little tubes in the testes called seminiferous tubules. That's where spermatogenesis occurs, which is meiosis in the male. Those sperm will then move to a structure called the epididymis. The epididymis also contains many small little ducts that store the sperm and allow a little more maturation of the sperm after their production in the testes. Those sperm will then move through the vas deferens, which is the longest portion of the system of ducts. That vas deferens is going to transport the sperm into the pelvic cavity through the inguinal canal. The vas deferens will travel then behind the urinary bladder, where it's going to pick up secretions from the first male gland called the seminal vesicles. And I'll remind you, there's a right and left. There's two testes, so there's going to be two vas deferens, two seminal vesicles. The seminal vesicles add about 60% of the total semen volume. So they're pretty significant as far as what they add to semen. A couple of the components found in seminal vesicle secretions are fructose, which is a carbohydrate for energy for the sperm to give the sperm enough ATP to power its flagellum. There's prostaglandins, which are involved in the viability and the motility of the sperm as well. The end of the vas deferens is called the ampulla. The ampulla joins the duct from the seminal vesicle. So the seminal vesicle has a little duct coming out of it here. The vas deferens, the ampulla, is here. Those two combine to form what's known as the ejaculatory duct. And there's going to be two of those, one on the right side, one on the left side. They're found within the prostate gland. So the prostate gland is this fairly large gland sitting just below the urinary bladder. And the two ejaculatory ducts are going to meet up with the prostatic urethra, which is coming from the urinary bladder. So this is where the urinary system joins the reproductive system. So the rest of the way, that urethra can be used for both the transport of urine and also the transport of semen. The prostate's going to add 25% of semen volume. It's a little more milky secretion. It has a lot of things that promote motility and viability of the sperm. One of those we use as a marker for prostate cancer. It's known as prostate-specific antigen, or PSA. So a PSA test is a way to maybe help us either diagnose or follow prostate cancer. A prostate tends to enlarge with age. That's called BPH. And an enlarged prostate can affect both urination as well as reproduction. Membranous urethra is then the region of the urethra that extends out of the prostate. This is where it'll pick up some secretions from the bulbourethral glands, or Cowper's glands, which basically just produces a mucus. And that mucus is alkaline, and that alkalinity is going to help make sure the pH is appropriate. There can be some acids in the urethra from urine, so urine is usually acidic. So you have to neutralize that acidity. The vagina is also acidic. So semen is alkaline, and that helps neutralize any acidity. The rest of the urethra is called the spongy urethra. That is the last part of the male urethra that extends down the length of the penis. We can see in this picture the urethra will end as the external urethral orifice. There are the erectile tissues found inside the penis, the corpora cavernosum and the corpus spongiosum. Finally, we also notice the foreskin. Foreskin is the skin that surrounds the end of the penis. The end of the penis is known as the glans penis. And the foreskin, or prepuce, is what's removed during a circumcision. So quite a bit of anatomy, all on this picture. This drawing helps just visualize some of this kind of ducts and glands looking posteriorly. So this is a posterior view of the bladder. We see the seminal vesicles in the back of the bladder. We see the two vas deferens coming around from the front, becoming larger here at the ampulla. The merge of the seminal vesicle duct with the ampulla forms the ejaculatory ducts found inside the prostate gland. And then those two ducts merging into the prostatic urethra, which then leaves the urethra and becomes the intermediate or membranous urethra, where the Cowper's glands are. And then finally it enters the penis as the spongy urethra. So the previous slide and this slide shows quite a bit of this male anatomy. In the next video, we'll start to look at a little more of the structures of the male reproductive system, and then we'll also be looking at how sperm are produced.